When I was growing up, I used to wonder why it was that Bill Cosby of The Cosby Show was always shown as being kind of a dork. Then there was a string of very popular sitcoms that came out beginning in the late 80s and moving forward, where men are shown basically as bumbling idiots that need to be rescued and saved from themselves by their wife.
That's what you said 17 years ago when I married you, and I'm still waiting for a good one.
By the way, you promised me a boat. I'm getting my boat.
Oh, no, you're not.
Right, so I should go to work and raise the kids, all right? It should be all me, yeah. And what do you do all day? I'm sorry.
I like these shows just as much as the next guy, but I always wondered to myself, why is it that every single guy is basically a buffoon? And thank God for the powerful, wise woman that would always rescue the guy from his own idiocy. This is called cultural programming. There are many red pill channels that would call this a gynocentric society, and in some ways that's true. We are very gynocentric as a culture.
Gynocentrism is the practice of prioritizing women's perspectives, needs, and concerns, often to the exclusion or marginalization of men's perspectives. It can be seen as a focus on or emphasis on the female perspective in various contexts, including social structures, cultural norms, and even intimate relationships.
This is simply a decades-long push by the government to restructure the society using what in psyops is called the normalization process. The normalization process, especially when done at this high of a level, is where you take all the media sources and then you take the news sources and you get everyone to push an ideology. And what ends up happening is it starts at first to be seen as some sort of maybe a fresh new idea, like this is kind of funny, I've not seen this before. If you've watched older sitcoms, usually the father was not a buffoon, but he was somebody that had wisdom and somebody that had some sort of authority. So at first this may seem as though, oh, this is kind of funny because it's different, but it's part of a systematic normalization process. So as I said, you begin with every media source that you can find and you begin to push the narrative. After you've pushed the narrative to the point where people are paying attention, now what you do is instead of just pushing it from the media sources, now you begin to push it through programmed television. And before the internet, that was what everyone watched. So it works its way into sitcoms and it works its way into nightly programs. So once you have the media and the news, and now you also have programming, then it moves its way into movies. Once it's moved into that part of the culture, this is where the agenda can be pushed to not only escalate one side, but to now marginalize another side. And many of you can remember the tipping point. If you look back through record keeping, we see that the tipping point where this really got traction was somewhere between 2008 to 2012. This is where many sociologists will say the tipping point of the actual culture in the United States began to really heavily lean to one side. But it took several years of that other type of programming to get us to that point. If you had a politician that came on stage and told you outright that they were going to systematically break down half of society while systematically building up the other half of society, men and women, you wouldn't have stood a chance. But after that tipping point, that became the rallying cry. And this is where we go from a more traditional leaning society to a much more liberal theology and a much more gynocentric society. So the normalization process, as I'm explaining it to you, is used all the time in government psyops. So if you break it down, what are we doing? As a culture, we are normalizing the tearing down of one piece of society while normalizing elevating the other piece of society, which sounds great on the surface, except for the fact that when you break down one half to elevate the other, that means that you're going to have resentment eventually. We saw the culmination of this kind of pushback when we had the 2024 election. So when you marginalize part of society to elevate another, not only do you get resentment, but eventually you get pushback. The pendulum eventually swings back. And the backlash came to fruition in the election of 2024. We need to keep our eyes out for what we call the slippery slope effect. And this was seen as relatively derogatory, but it's true. The slippery slope effect is where you give in to one thing and now you have to give in to another thing. Pretty soon, you're sliding down that slope, and not only are you now encouraged to cheer for something that you never wanted in the first place, but eventually you become marginalized, and then comes financial consequences and professional consequences for not playing along. If you have experienced anything like this, I want you to put it in the comment section. I'll be taking a look at those here shortly. But if you understand what I'm talking about and you've seen this in action and you've watched the normalization process, tell us about it in the comments.